The 2026 Austrian Grand Prix has come and go, and with that, George Russell picks up his second win of the season for Mercedes and slowly inks back into the championship versus Kimi Antonelli. Unfortunately for Mr. George Russell, though, there's never been a champion that has won in Austria in an even year of the calendar, so he'll have to break that stat if he wants to complete the comeback, but he was able to hold on today, and honestly, if the race goes maybe 5 more laps, we have a very different result to this Grand Prix. But before you can even talk about the last 5 laps, you have to mention the fact that Red Bull possibly threw this race away with Verstappen by staying out 6 laps longer than George Russell. Maybe if they bring him in sooner, we have a different result. First, starting off with qualifying, obviously, I have to talk about the Verstappen crash in Q3, which was due to a lack of downforce, rear downforce to be specific, from Verstappen, and saw him crashing into the barriers in what was honestly a pretty good qualifying session there for Austria. Of course, all the cars are very close in terms of the 1 lap pace just because it's a shorter track, and we actually saw a very interesting result. Of course, the controversy was George Russell improving his time through yellow flags. It was said that it was only a single yellow when it came up for him to go through there, which obviously, though, it should have been a double yellow. So Russell finally gets some good luck for him this year in terms of how his season has gone. He's been very unlucky. So to get that to go his way was lucky. And obviously he sticks it on pole. It would have been, interesting to see how much he would have actually had it on pole by if you get rid of, him lifting off into that corner a little bit. So that was interesting. Of course, Antonelli backed out of his lap, so it was looking like a Ferrari 1-2 until obviously Russell took it. Verstappen, though, probably, if he doesn't have his moment there, he probably might end up third, maybe on the front row. I think he was really the only person that was challenging the 2 Mercedes this weekend, as we saw in the race. And then, of course, the McLarens were down there. They didn't really have the car this weekend to really compete, but they still were up there, and we'll get into the race, but honestly, disappointing result from Norris this weekend. But yeah, that was pretty much the headlines of qualifying. Verstappen almost didn't make Q3 though, because Red Bull decided to keep him in the pits, and luckily by 400ths of a second, he was able to advance, but that could have been very costly for Red Bull. As we move on to the race, obviously I mentioned in the beginning how Red Bull possibly threw this one away, as right there before the last pit stops, Russell decided to box about 6 laps before Verstappen. And at that point, Verstappen had the lead down to about a second, maybe 1.2 of a second. And with that, Red Bull stayed out 6 laps to get a tire offset, but he ended up losing about almost 9 seconds by doing that. It's hard to say what would have been better. I mean, if he decides maybe pitting only 3 laps later, so he reduces that gap, but then the tire offset isn't as much, would it have made much more of a difference? I think it honestly would have. I think Verstappen was really putting the pressure on Russell, and I think honestly, Red Bull would have been better off literally just pitting him maybe a lap or 2 after Russell, because at worst comes to worst, he's only going to be 2 seconds, maybe 3 seconds at max behind Verstappen at that point, or behind Russell at that point, excuse me. And at that point, I feel like Verstappen was already putting the pressure on Russell. I think it would have been interesting to see what would have happened between the two of them had Verstappen been closer. I feel like we saw Russell, he made a couple of mistakes. He went off the track in turn 1 with Verstappen 10 seconds behind him. So imagine Verstappen's only 3 seconds behind him for most of the last part of the race. I think Red Bull absolutely blew it this weekend, and they made a couple of very bad strategy calls. I mean, I just talked about it in qualifying. You had Verstappen almost eliminated in Q2 because they decided not to send him out there, and they didn't even use the advantage he had of the 2 extra sets. Actually, they did, because he was able to set that banker lap on a new set. But was it really worth almost getting eliminated in Q2? I don't think so. Not at all. So Red Bull just honestly very questionable team this weekend. The performance was there. They brought the upgrades, and they had the shot with Verstappen to possibly steal a win here at the Red Bull Ring. But due to bad strategy and just time running out, I mean, this race goes 2 more laps. Antonelli and Verstappen were both right there. Antonelli might have passed Verstappen. Antonelli might have gone both of them if this race is 5 more laps. Absolutely, it was absolute dramatic scenes there at the end. It was a shame it ended when it did because I feel like we got teased of a great finish. I mean, it was already a pretty good finish, but we were just there. It was just the bottle was about to explode if that race would have gone about 5 more laps, and it would have been crazy to see what would have happened. I think for sure, definitely would have been a different result with the top three, but regardless, the race was pretty interesting through and through as we do a more deeper details of the actual race instead of just what happened there at the end. At the beginning there, the race start honestly was pretty calm, if you want to say that. I mean, besides Antonelli, deciding to go off the track, 2 times in back-to-back corners, you had, I would say, rather staying stationary on lap one throughout most of the field. I mean, down in the back, there was movement. You had like Ocon get up to like P11 at the start of the race, which was pretty crazy. But besides that, I mean, the Ferraris were going at it. Of course, Hamilton got past Leclerc again. So another weekend. I don't even really want to talk about Leclerc this weekend. He just really, disappointing race again. It's kind of crazy to see how bad Leclerc's been in the races recently, and it reflects in the driver standings. He's now behind both McLarens in the driver standings, which sounds crazy to say considering how good the Ferrari's been. Piastri had a pretty good race though this week, but Lando really wasn't anywhere. But yeah, back into the beginning of the race, there was an absolutely incredible battle between Hamilton and Verstappen, multiple laps. I mean, the moves we saw, there's something about Hamilton and Verstappen, man, them battling. I mean, there's still, maybe you feel like there's still some built up aggression there from 2021, but those two, when they are wheel to wheel, it is an absolute treat to see. I mean, it was almost a full, from turn 3 to out of 8 or 7, that was of just side by side, just battling. It was absolutely incredible scenes. And from that point on, the race started to kind of get into a settlement kind of area. You had, I mean, Antonelli go up the field and then Leclerc kind of dropping back. He was one of the first people to pit, if not the first. And then there was, of course, the virtual safety car with Sainz. That happened after everybody had made their first pit stops. Of course, Mercedes blew it right there with Antonelli. They had a chance to just wait one more lap. They would have definitely gotten an advantage there. And then Ferrari boxed Hamilton, and that was just not the right move at all. They put him on the softs, and then he struggled the rest of the race after that. He probably finishes 4th without them pitting there to put him on the softs. So that was a frustrating, it just wasn't a good race weekend. Qualifying was nice for Ferrari, but the race was an absolute joke. Leclerc finished 8th, 15 seconds off of the top 7. So just that was bad. And then, Hamilton might have had a shot at 4th, but 5th is probably honestly a more, expected where Ferrari is supposed to be at. With that race. It just compared to Barcelona, it was night and day strategy wise and race wise there for Ferrari. Yeah, pretty much besides the main thing I was talking about earlier about Red Bull blowing it possibly. I mean, you had Norris, not a good weekend. He didn't even beat Hadjar. He finished 7th. Piastri, P4. Racing Bulls lock out 9 and 10 there for double points finish, best of the rest. They had a really good car this weekend, I guess, just compared to pretty much anybody else in the midfield. So that's something to, be happy about. I mean, they've had a good car all season, it's felt like. And, Lindblad was ahead of Lawson for most of the race. Lawson said he was on fire. I guess he put it out somehow. But Lawson ended up getting ahead of Lindblad at some point during the race and finishing ahead of him. You had, nothing else really remarkable. I mean, I guess the Cadillacs both, Cadillac brings the biggest upgrades of the season for them, and both of them DNF'd before lap 10, I want to say. So, I mean, how many laps has Bottas done in the last 3 races? Like 8, 9? Like, I don't feel like Valtteri Bottas has made more than like maybe 13 laps in race distance the last 3 Grand Prix. So there's that. Could always be Bottas, I guess. But yeah, that brings us back to, did Red Bull throw away the race? I mean, in reality, we'll never No, because, obviously the race, only 71 laps, maybe 74 laps, obviously different result probably. But, they pit uh, Verstappen there a little bit sooner. Maybe if they even undercut Mercedes, I mean, we'll never really know the true answer of what would have happened, but I think Red Bull definitely had the opportunity this weekend to win the race. And I think they'll regret their decision making to have Verstappen stay out for so long. Because it only benefited them so much with the offset. And honestly, I don't even know if Verstappen really would have caught up to him that much if it wasn't for, the traffic at the end. I think at the end of the day, they'll take the second place, especially how the season started, but it's almost like what could have been more. But yeah, that's going to sum it up pretty much for the race review of Austria. Let me know what you guys think Red Bull should have done in the comments below, or anything else that stood out to you this weekend. I'll do a driver's ratings in the next upcoming days. Appreciate you guys tuning into this video. And if you made it this far, leave a like and drop a comment, and I'll catch you guys in a couple days.